Morning. All right, I'm all set. Good morning. You're all set? I can feel it already. I think energy in here is very low. I don't know if it's the heat or if it's the lack of folks or what it is, but I'm going to need this energy level to come up quite a bit. We're going to be talking about one of the big issues that David had in his life. I guess issues is the right way of saying it. One of his greatest sins. So we're going to be in 2 Samuel chapter 11. That'll be our main text for today. We'll have a verse before that. But before I get started, one thing I do want to say, however, is last week I said something incorrect, and nobody caught me, nor did anybody correct me, and they should have. So you all need to work on your Greek. I said that there are two words for worship in the Greek. That was correct. I said that one of them is latreo and one of them is proskuneo. And I said that latreo was to kiss towards. It's actually backwards. Proskuneo is like kiss towards, right? So the word itself basically is that. So I misquoted it last week. So nobody called me on it. Either you're super nice or you're not up on your Greek. But I wanted to... Exactly. So anyway, I wanted to correct that because that was not right. So a latreo typically is more like a worship service, something more formalized, where proskuneo is like the worship of the heart. I am kissing towards, right? I'm blowing kisses, right? That's the idea. Okay. So I wanted to correct that. All right, so as we get started here, we talk about David's greatest sin. Just have some questions for us to talk a little bit about. Can one decision change the course of a man's life? Okay, absolutely, right? And we'll see a lot of that actually here in the story of David. I think the answer to that is pretty obvious, right? And so instead of talking that one out, I gave you a second question to actually talk out. Because typically as a teacher, you don't want to just ask a question that's easily answered with a yes or no, because that really doesn't generate any discussion, right? But how about this one? Does it usually happen suddenly, or is it the end of a long series of compromises? Compromises, right? A little here and there. And that's what we're going to talk about here, because we see and we know that David is a very spiritual man, right? A man after God's own heart. And yet he's able to do some crazy levels of sin. And how can those two things be true at the same time? You heard me talk a lot about that week one, about that. How can those two things be true at the same time? And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So let's hit, though, the verse here, or a couple verses in James chapter 1, to help us illustrate and talk a little bit about this idea of compromises and this idea of drifting. James chapter 1, 13 through 15, let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Then when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. Okay, so I want you to get this idea, this word picture here, because it's very applicable in what we're going to talk about today. In verse 14, it says, when he is carried away. Carried away. What do those words kind of mean to you? Carried away. Do we use those in our common vernacular?
Say somebody carried away.
Okay.
These
Lost control. Yeah, they got carried away. When sometimes do people get carried away? When their emotions take over, yeah. What are some specific instances when that kind of thing happens?
Spend money.
Spend money, right? Or you can get carried away on vacation, right? You get into the vacation mode and you forget that you worked for that money. And then you're going out and you're just kind of spending, and you kind of get carried away, right? It might happen when you're talking with somebody and they say something that's a little bit offensive, and then you kind of bark back, and then all of a sudden the whole conversation gets carried away, right? And what was an innocent conversation just a minute ago becomes like a heated battle, right? And you say that people got carried away. You go back later and you apologize. I'm sorry, I just got carried away. Right? That's the idea here. And then in verse 15 it says, when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin. Right? There is a pattern to this. There is a growth to this. Right? He gets carried away. Then when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death, right? It's a progression. And so we see that here in James chapter 1, and the warning here from James is that don't do that. Don't not understand that sin is a progression. And we're going to talk about that. Because nobody one day gets up and thinks, oh, I'm going to commit adultery and murder today. Who does that? Nobody. Well, maybe some psychopaths. But even the psychopaths typically, there's some progression. But nobody does that. But what happens is you just get carried away. And the circumstances that exist, you try to cover it up, you make your compromises, and you try to cover it up, and then here pretty soon you're doing all kinds of things that you never would have thought that you would have been capable of, right? And that's really the story of David, right? He drifted. This chapter and class are really about that progression, this idea of spiritual erosion. Spiritual erosion. Again, nobody all of a sudden one day just says, hey, look, I'm going to do all of these crazy, sinful things. Usually it happens over time. Has anybody ever seen the movie Fireproof? Only a couple of you? Several more. Really good movie made by the Kendrick brothers. They had a whole series of quote-unquote spiritual movies. That one was about marriage, right? And about how marriage can, in a lot of ways, just fade over time. There's a song that I love in that particular movie. It's by Casting Crowns, and it's called Slow Fade. And I thought I'd just read the lyrics here because I think it's 100% applicable to this idea of spiritual erosion. It says, be careful, little eyes, what you see. By the way, this song is a throwback to that, the little song that we sing to young children. Be careful, little eyes, what you see. Yeah, we all know that one, right? But this was kind of updated and upgraded here for adults. Be careful, little eyes, what you see. It is the second glance that ties your hands as darkness pulls the strings. Be careful, little feet, where you go, for it's the little feet behind you that are sure to follow. It's a slow fade when you give yourself away. It's a slow fade when black and white have turned to gray, and thoughts invade, choices made. A price will be paid when you give yourself away. People never crumble in a day. It's a slow fade. I won't read the rest of it. We just don't have time. But really, it points to this idea that spiritual erosion is a real thing, just like marital erosion or erosion between a friendship between people. It's a drifting. It is a slow falling away. So we'll see that here with David. I did not cover, like I said I was going to last week, I didn't cover 2 Samuel chapter 7. And that was really the success, piece of this. You just don't have time to hit everything. If we stopped and we went through every one of these chapters, it would be a great study, but we would be here for 3 years, and nobody wants to do that. So in 7, what we see here, David plans to build a temple for God and makes a beautiful prayer to him. It's fantastic, right? So you see here that David is solidified into his position and into his kingdom. And one of the first things he wants to do here is to build God a temple, which is 100% pleasing to God, and David and God make a covenant. And you can read about that in chapter 7. Then we see more success from David. He defeats the Philistines and the Edomites in chapter 8. And then in chapter 9, we see his kindness to Mephibosheth, who was Saul's grandson. And so here David is still trying to do the right thing for the house of Saul, most likely because of his friendship with Jonathan. Mephibosheth was Jonathan's son, and here David is being pretty righteous, pretty holy. You don't see this in any of the times of antiquity where one king, where the bloodline has changed, goes back and honors another bloodline. Typically what you see in history is one bloodline goes back and wipes the other bloodline completely away, right? But David doesn't do that. He acts much more in line with what his friendship with Jonathan would say, but also holiness would require. Since he made the covenant with the house of Saul and Jonathan. And so what does David do? He goes and says, is there anybody who I can honor from the house of Saul and of Jonathan? He says, there's this one basically boy at the time he's lame in both feet. And David says, bring him to me, right? You can read all about that in chapter 9. But again, David doing the right things, right? Continuing to do the right things. And then chapter 10, he continues to consolidate power and defeats Ammon and Aaron. Okay, so literally, you could say that as chapter 11 begins, David is spiritually on top. He's on top physically. The kingdom is all aligned. Things are going well, right? And it's the pinnacle of his success. And then we get to chapter 11. So chapter 11. And it's Bathsheba, David's great sin. I didn't put here greatest sin. It could potentially be labeled that way. I just put his great sin because it was. Let's read the entire chapter, and then we'll analyze it. Then it happened in the spring, at the time when kings go out to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel. And they destroyed the sons of Ammon and besieged Rabbah, but David stayed at Jerusalem. Now when evening came, David arose from his bed and walked around on the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful in appearance. So David sent and inquired about the woman, and one said, is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? David sent messengers and took her, and when she came to him, he lay with her. And when she had purified herself from her uncleanness, she returned to her house. The woman conceived, and she sent and told David and said, I am pregnant. Then David sent to Joab, saying, Send me Uriah the Hittite. So Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked concerning the welfare of Joab and the people and the state of the war. Then David said to Uriah, Go down to your house and wash your feet. And Uriah went out of the king's house, and a present from the king was sent out after him. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of the Lord, and did not go down to his house. Now when they told David, saying, Uriah did not go down to his house, David said to Uriah, Have you not come from a journey? Why did you not go down to your house? Uriah said to David, The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in temporary shelters, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are camping in the open field. Shall I then go to my house and eat and drink and to lie with my wife? By your life and the life of your soul I will not do this thing. Then David said to Uriah, Stay here today also, and tomorrow I will let you go. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. Now David called him, and he ate and drank before him, and he made him drunk. And in the evening he went out to lie on his bed with his Lord's servants, but he did not go down to his house. Now in the morning David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. He had written in the letter, saying, "Place Uriah in the front line of the fiercest battle and withdraw from him, so that he may be struck down and die." So it was, as Joab kept watch on the city, that he put Uriah at the place where he knew that there were valiant men. The men of the city went out and fought against Joab, and some of the people among David's servants fell, and Uriah the Hittite also died. Then Joab sent and reported to David all the events of the war. He charged the messenger, saying, "When you have finished telling all the events of the war to the king, and if it happens that the king's wrath rises, and he says to you, 'Why did you go so near to the city to fight? Did you not know that they would shoot from the wall? Who struck down Abimelech the son of Jerubbaal? Did not a woman throw an upper millstone on him from the wall so that he died at Thebez? Why did you go so near to the wall? Then you shall say, your servant Uriah the Hittite is also dead.'" So the messenger departed and came and reported to David all that Joab had sent him to tell. The messenger said to David, "The men prevailed against us and came out against us in the field, but we pressed them as far as the entrance of the gate. Moreover, the archers shot at your servants from the wall, so some of the king's servants are dead, and your servant Uriah the Hittite is also dead." Then David said to the messenger, "Thus you shall say to Joab, 'Do not let this thing displease you, for the sword devours one as well as another. Make your battle against the city stronger and overthrow it, and so encourage him.'" Now when the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah her husband was dead, she mourned for her husband. When the time of mourning was over, David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife. Then she bore him a son. But the thing that David had done was evil in the sight of the Lord. Okay, long chapter, but we needed to kind of get through that. There's so much in this chapter. I'm not going to hit it, but I wanted to point something out here about Uriah. And I thought about going and making a whole point about this, but I decided to just leave it out just for time's sake. But look at Uriah's character. Like, the thing that David did while he was sober, Uriah would not even do when he was drunk. David made him drunk, right? So the character of Uriah the Hittite, the integrity of Uriah here, is a fantastic story here. And unfortunately, his integrity actually cost him his life. And that's a whole nother story that we can go through. But anyway, I had some other points I wanted to make, and so I'm not going to make that point, but I did want to talk about it, because here you see that there's a reason why here that this is very displeasing to the Lord. And there's many reasons why, but that's one of them. Just the righteousness here of Uriah the Hittite. Okay, so in the end, however, this chapter is super shocking, right? And it's shocking because David here, everything that we've seen up to this point has shown his character, his morality, his willingness to do what God has said. And then all of a sudden what we see here from David is he just kind of falls off a spiritual cliff, right? Or was it? Or was it, right? So first thought here is that temptation begins with spiritual passivity. Okay, we won't reread verses 1 through 4 here, but here's the thought. David should not have even been there. Where should have David been? He should have been out leading his men. He should have been out helping them, right? So he gets to this pinnacle where everything feels safe and everybody is conquered. We see that in the previous chapters. And then what does David do, right? He pulls back, and then he stops leading his men. And he was idle. And it's in this time of idleness that he's walking on the rooftop and sees Bathsheba, right? And so here's the first piece of this, which is, when we start looking at this idea of spiritual passivity, it really is one of idleness. When we give up our purpose in the things that God has given us to do, whether it's to lead or whatever it might be, right, that's when temptations start to increase. Temptations of pride or temptations like we see here of David, which is to use the time to do something that should not be done, right? And so the temptations here increase significantly on David because he wasn't where he should have been. Okay. Let me ask you a question then. So when it comes to us in our lives today, what kind of rooftop moments do we experience, right? This idea of we weren't where we should have been, and it has introduced a temptation to us that could potentially lead to some compromise. What kind of things in our lives today do we experience?
TV, internet, social media.
Okay.
Those kind of things.
Okay.
They can blow you away, blow you down.
100%, right? Whether it is just because we're using it to fill the time, right? Or it's because we're using it to fill the time and then there are things on it which then lead to other compromises, right? Whatever temptations they might be. Many times you hear people say, oh, I just don't have the time. I just don't have the time, right? But if you were to go and to look at, somebody's, if there was a heavenly scribe writing down all the things that people were doing, how many of those things in that, in that scroll would be things that would actually benefit the kingdom, benefit yourself, benefit the family, or whatever else, and yet we might use it for entertainment purposes, which might go down and lead to more compromises, right? 100%, definitely. It's interesting how electronic media, whether it's social or otherwise, really can become a huge time suck, right? And most of the time, that time could have been used for work, again, for the family, for the church, whatever else, right?
Kids, and with their hours on it, and with us bringing the church up and keep it going and alive,
Yeah.
next generation is really in trouble with some of that.
Absolutely, right. Okay, perfect. That's a great, great, and we should all look at that and say, how am I using my time? Am I creating idle time by not volunteering to lead, to do whatever I need, whether it's in the church or the family? Yeah, I see another hand.
Reminded me, as growing up, that, they had commercials and there was curfews for children at the time. It's like, you should be home by 10 o'clock, and then they had a commercial, I think, children, you know where your parents are. I don't think really remember that one. But the point is that you look at some of these things, you look at car accidents, other things, and I look at that in the paper, and it's like 2, 3, and 4 in the morning.
Yeah.
After midnight, anything after 10, some stuff happens, and I think people know that, so.
Yeah.
You have to be home and going to bed.
Yeah, and you asked the question.
And that's what you should do, not let yourself get in this rooftop moment.
Exactly, and that's where you ask the question, why were they even there?
Yeah.
Right? 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning.
Car accident on county roads.
Really? Yeah.
It's like, you probably did, when I was working, everybody wanted to go out to the brew pub to eat, they have great food.
Yeah.
No, they want to drink, the local beers, stuff like that. So, you can, and that's where a lot of accidents happen, people lost their jobs,
Yeah.
killed people, and everything went awry with doing that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Small compromises, right? Small compromises. It's not going to be a big deal if I just go out with these guys and, maybe have one drink or whatever else, right? And then one drink leads to another, right? And pretty soon you're doing things you never thought you would, right? Yeah, exactly. Where one decision, right, can affect your entire life. Anybody else? Okay. There's a ton, right? There's a ton. We could sit here and we could talk about this for the rest of the time. But I want you to understand the idea here, which is like, would spiritual passivity, meaning I'm not taking on some responsibility that God has given me, right? Some purpose that I have in leading, whether it's the family or the church or whatever it might be. When I shirk those duties, has it put me in a situation where I could use the leftover time to do things that I shouldn't be doing at all? All right, so that's the thought here. Okay. Okay. Does that look right still? It's different on my screen. Okay, so temptation progresses with small compromises. Okay, so notice here what David did. He's walking on the rooftop, and then he saw. And then he inquired, who is this person that I saw? Right? And then he sent for her. Right? And then he took her. Right? And then he committed adultery. And you see this idea of progression, right? And that's what we were talking about here. It rarely explodes. Typically, it's really growing, right? Like we saw in James chapter 1, right? Lust gives birth to sin, and sin gives birth to death, right? David chose each of these actions in a sequence, okay? Now, where could he have taken the off-ramp? Let's be David for a minute here, okay? Where could he have taken the off-ramp to this thing that really changed his entire life? He could have just said, wow, I probably shouldn't have seen that. I'm going to go back inside. There's a great off-ramp. Yes. Yes, he did. Right, at this time, he already had Abigail. He already had Michael, right, and probably some others as well. But we know of at least two by name, right? And so, yeah, that could have shorted, exactly. So he could have just removed himself from the rooftop, okay? Where else could there have been an off-ramp?
After all those points, really, after he inquired, he could have.
After every one of them. Exactly. Because whoever kind of told him that she was the wife of Uriah the Hittite, we see how great Uriah is here and what kind of a man he is. Wouldn't it have been great if David would have said, wow, I would hate to sin against that guy. That guy is, he's one of my mighty warriors. He's got great integrity. And you know what? Even if for whatever reason I think his wife is beautiful, I would never do that to him, right? First, it's I should never do it to her. And then second, it's I should never do it to him, right? And so there's off-ramps, right? And yet he's not taking the off-ramps. He's just moving right on ahead, right? Isn't that what sin typically that we get into in our lives kind of looks like? There's so many things that we could have turned around. We could have made a different decision. We should have, taken a step off the road. And yet, because of the things that we want inside, or what God calls it is lust, because of the lust that we have, no matter what it is, whether it's lust for women or lust for power or lust for money, lust for whatever it could be, right? We don't take the off-ramps. We want the end state, right? We're lusting after the end state, whatever it might be. And so we're willing to then make the compromises, okay? And that's really what happens. And it happens in a sequence, and typically we're just not willing to make different decisions, okay? Here's the irony, here's the lesson, I guess. Moral failures usually begin long before the visible sin. It's already happening in the heart. It's already churning down deep inside, right? And it's there. And it's waiting for the opportunity to pounce, right? God calls the devil a roaring lion, seeking to whom he may devour, right? And sin is much like it, right? I think it's said of Peter that sin is crouching at your door, right? Go ahead.
Sometimes we go down this path and we say, let me see how close I can get.
Yeah.
Sin. I won't make the first decision, I'm okay. Second decision, I'm okay. Keep getting closer, we keep getting closer. I haven't done anything bad yet, and all of a sudden it's like that.
Yeah.
And you see, I'm not doing anything wrong here. I'm not doing anything wrong with you make that last decision.
Yeah.
But it was that progression that got you.
Yep. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, it's kind of like, when you're wading into a pool of cold water. You get your toes wet, and you get your ankles wet, and you get up to your knees, up to your waist, and finally, like, I'm pretty cold and wet now. I'm just gonna go the rest of the way, right? And that's kind of how it is with sin, right? But we have to check our hearts. That's the idea here, is that we have to check our hearts all along the way. Because if there's things that you are thinking about, you're mulling over, your thoughts have really progressed to, well, that wouldn't be that bad, or I deserve this, or whatever else, right? Then the moral failure has already taken hold. The sin hasn't happened, but what's the right word? But the ground is plowed, right? And the fruit is ready to be picked. And so that's why we have to, like the song says, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Be careful, little ears, what you hear, right? Because, they lead to these moral failures. Okay. Any thoughts or comments before we move on to the next? Go ahead.
He could have prayed to God that Satan is trying to take me. Please help me,
Yeah.
He could have went to God for help.
Yeah. Yeah, and no, he should have. That's what he should have done, right? But for whatever reason, and I think everybody can relate to this, I think we've all made this mistake at some point. At some point, we're like, but I don't want to do that because I want the thing, whatever it is, right? Yeah. Yeah, lust conceives and brings forth sin. That's the whole point here in James, chapter 1. And that's the issue. That's the temptation, right? My father-in-law used to say, I really like it, he's like, you can't tempt me with Brussels sprouts. Right? Because I don't like Brussels sprouts. And so, yeah, you put Brussels sprouts in front of me, no problem. Right? But put for him, it's like a raspberry donut. Put a raspberry donut in front of him, and now temptation becomes real, right? And that's the same with us, right? There's certain things that do not tempt us at all, but there are certain things that do. And it's different for every one of us, right? Whatever it might be. But in the end, the lust is still the same. I want that. That's mine. I deserve that. I know what that's going to be like when I finally fulfill this thing, right? And that's what it is, and that's the difficulty, right? Because there's certain points where we're like, I don't want to pray to God. I would rather do the thing, right?
Scripture came up with what Bill said, the Proverbs one, it says, man take fire into his bosom, and his clothes not be burned.
Yeah.
They walk on hot coals, and feet not be scorched. So is the one who goes into his neighbor's wife, whatever touches her will not go unclean.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a progression.
Yeah, it is a progression, right? Yeah.
Burned or scorched.
Yeah. I think we talked about that last time, like Proverbs 5, 6, and 7. When we did this last summer, we talked about that and like how pervasive that can be, right? And now we're talking about it from his father's perspective. Right? This is the thing. All right. So, man, much more we could talk about. I'm running out of time. Sin requires damage control. Most of this chapter, just like with the sin itself, most of this chapter, David could have taken an off-ramp and probably should have, And we'll talk about what the off-ramp probably is, but he should have. But here is this idea of damage control, because most of the rest of this chapter is, yeah, he did it in verses 1 through 4, right? And the rest of the chapter is, I'm covering it up. I wanted it. It was the thing that I wanted, and now I don't want anybody to know. Right? Okay, he lies. What's David's lie here? Because he doesn't say a lie. He lives a lie. What's the lie that he lives?
He wants Uriah to lay with his wife so he can clean the babies.
Okay, yes. He's setting up the situation for plausible deniability that he didn't do this thing. Right? When there's absolute proof. Okay? So he's like, Uriah, come on back. And then guess what? Then nobody's going to know that this baby is mine. Go ahead.
Except that David is right.
Yeah. He more than likely would have. Look at that. Right, exactly. More than likely, that would have been the case, right? Yeah, he didn't think that through either, right? There's a lot of things he didn't think through. So absolutely. He is under the impression, he's lying to himself, for one, hey, I'm going to cover this up so nobody will know, so I'm going to call Uriah back, right? But then the whole point of what he's trying to do here is to, like I said, create plausible deniability that he ever did it and basically cover up his sin, okay? So he lies, he gets Uriah drunk, and we already talked about it. Uriah is a better man drunk than David is at this point, stone sober. He uses Joab. Joab here is the instrument of murder, right? Him and the army that he's fighting against, right? Those are the instruments of murder. And he sets this all up, okay? This is the same David who just took care of Mephibosheth, if I can say it, right? This is the same David who just made a covenant with God. This is the same David who cared to make sure that God had a place to live, not in tents, when he himself saw that he was living in something fancy, and he said, yeah, I should do that for God. This is the same guy, right? This is the same guy. And yet, look at him. He is so enthralled, involved with covering up his sin that he reverts to all kinds of things. Lying and manipulation and using people and planning and plotting murder. Wow. You could have just walked off the rooftop. Okay. So his off-ramp here after the sin, right? At first it was he could have just not committed the sin. His off-ramp after the sin is he could have just confessed it. I did this thing, it was wrong. The baby's mine, right? And that would have been significantly better, right? But no, he continues to double down on his sin progression, and he continues to just do whatever he can to cover it up. He doesn't want anybody to know that what he has in his life, is damaging, right? And that's how sin it works many times. We think, that whatever we're harboring down deep, that it may never come out, and nobody will find out, right? But really what happens is it's never truly secret. It just creates this idea of slavery, right? David was a slave to his damage control. Go ahead.
It's interesting that what's going through David's mind is how do I cover up my sin to the people around me?
Yeah.
And God knows what a sin is already. I mean, like, wasn't he?
No, bring it on. Preach it, brother, let's go.
Didn't it even enter his mind that God knew what the sin was and what was it's going to have consequences because of that?
Yeah. All sins that we think are secret or private or whatever, are all seen by God, right? They're all seen by God, right? Verse 27 here, it says, but the thing that David had done was evil in the sight of the Lord, right? And then the next chapter is like it's like one of my favorite stories of the entire Bible, right? When Nathan comes to him and then confronts him, and he talks about, the little sheep, that had an owner that loved him, right? Oh, that's the best thing. And I'm not going to cover it today. And I don't actually have plans to cover it, although I may do it anyway, because it's literally my favorite thing in the whole Bible. Even if nobody had ever known what David had done with Bathsheba and done to Uriah, even if all that was true, it still would be revealed at the end of this life, right? Because that's the thing that we don't think about or understand, right? When it comes to judgment, right, everything that we think is secret will be revealed. So, is that something you want to just get off your heart and mind and soul now? Or do we want to wait to the judgment when our lives are put up on the screen or whatever it's going to be, and we see that and we're like, oh boy, look at that. That's who I truly was. That's who I was down deep in my heart, right? And the things that I did, there they are for everybody to see, right? Whether it's revealed here on this earth or it's revealed in judgment, there will be nothing left unknown. Everything will be brought to bear. God sees it all, right? So, sin, we think, for whatever reason, that we don't, maybe it's not out there, but at some point it will be out there, whether it's on this earth or in the life to come. Just real briefly, I've seen this happen. Sin that happened at one point come to light 20 or 30 years later, and it is very damaging. It would be significantly better for somebody just to come forward and say, hey, look, this is what I did, than to wait 20 or 30 years and have it come out accidentally or, from another source. Confession is the road to freedom, right? Freedom from the slavery of damage control, of the guilt of hiding whatever it might be, right? Confession is easier. It just seems harder at the time. Did I see a hand again? So, all right. In the end, God saw it all. He brings Nathan the prophet to David, and maybe I'll pause and do something about that next week. Okay, so what can we learn and how can we apply this in our lives? Okay, so just briefly, why is it that I always have too much material? Victory begins before temptation arrives. Okay? If you want to ensure that something doesn't become an issue for lust for you in your heart, then the idea is like you should just avoid the rooftop altogether. Why even put yourself in that situation? Okay? So first thing for practical application is protect your schedule. Why would you leave yourself time in your schedule to be able to go and to watch all this TV or to be in this other place or whatever else, right? So why would you not understand spiritual passivity and say, you know what, I'm going to volunteer to teach a class. I'm going to volunteer to lead some whatever. And then guess what? I won't have the free time that I might have had otherwise to go and to use it in a way that's not helpful spiritually, right? Protect your schedule. Fill it up with good things, right? That's what Ephesians chapter 4 says, right? Those who steal should steal no longer, but work to have something to give, right? The vacuum principle applies. If you don't want to have those temptations, then put your time into something that's good, right? And then guess what? You won't have the time to go prancing around on the rooftop, okay? So protect your schedule. Protect your eyes, right? Don't be looking at things that will be a temptation for you. Okay, never assume spiritual maturity makes you immune to temptation. I don't care who you are. I don't care how long you've been in the church. You are prey to temptation. So avoid it, right? It's basically kind of the same thing, except for, just don't be prideful about where you're at in terms of your spiritual maturity. You can fall anytime, anywhere. I don't care if you're an elder or a deacon, a preacher, somebody, a Bible class teacher. You can fall anytime. And so never think, that you are immune to temptation. Those who think they stand, take heed lest they fall, right? I think that says that in Scripture somewhere.
David proves that to us.
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole point here. David proves that to us, right? He was at the height of spiritual maturity and still fell prey to all of this. Okay, absolutely. All right, accountability is protection, not weakness. I talked a few weeks ago about this idea of brotherhood and friendship and all the rest of it. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, the reason why I talked about that is for this reason. You need somebody to be able to hold you accountable. If you have an issue with pride, if you have an issue with drinking, if you have an issue with lust, temptation, pornography, if you have any of this, right, whatever your particular temptation is, you should be talking about it with somebody. You should have somebody that you trust, that you say, look, I did a fantastic job this week. I kept myself completely out of temptation. I didn't do this or whatever. And then the next week, let's say you fall, and you go to that person and say, well, here's what I did, and I'm sorry for it, and I'm repenting of this, right? And accountability is protection, because you need somebody to hold you accountable. I'm going to tell you right now. You need somebody. And you need to find somebody you're willing to share with. It's not weakness. It's actually strength, right? And it's protection for you, for your soul. All right, and then realize sin eventually becomes visible. In the end, I don't care what you do, right? God knows it and sees it. Not only does he see the actual sin, the thing that actually happened, he actually knows the heart. He knows the motivation. He sees all of that, right? And once you realize that, then it becomes a little bit easier to then understand the nature of temptation and to avoid it. Okay. All right. Any thoughts or comments as we close? All right, heavy-duty chapter, super relevant to our lives, right? Take this chapter as a warning. Let's pray. Dear Father, thank you for this time that we have to come and to learn. We're just so grateful that you have written all this down. We know that this is your word because all of the great stories of the Bible, the things that we see for us in our lives, these characters are never glorified. We see all the things that they continue to potentially do wrong in their lives, and it helps us to see the human nature that we live under. It gives us a warning. It gives us the ability to see how others fell so we can avoid those temptations and those pitfalls. God, we just ask that we learn from this, that we continue to understand this idea of spiritual passivity. God, we understand that we need to keep ourselves away from temptation, that we need to be accountable. God, help us in all of these things. And none of them are comfortable. None of them are easy, but they're all necessary. God, help us in every way that we continue to live rightly before you in a way that we can have clean consciences. God, but most importantly, we know that when we fall, that we have an advocate with you, Jesus Christ our Lord. He gave his life and shed his blood so that when we do fall to temptation, that we will have forgiveness, and we're so thankful for this. God, thank you that we can come to him in these times, that we can open up our hearts and confess to him, and our hearts can have healing in this way. God, thank you for all of this. God, as we go into worship today, we ask that we worship you in spirit and in truth, and in everything that we do with a whole heart, with a clean heart, so that we can be pleasing unto you. This is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen.